or home or on vacation. There's really I have no option here but to record this one and to post it. And then I'll do 2 more, maybe 3. So we can then get to some understanding of this period of history, which is so important. And I was a little bit surprised when I showed this periodization, and I just expected that people would look at it and instantly understand it because of what you were taught in world history, okay? And then I ran into a wall when I realized that only one or 2 students even had an idea of any of this periodization. What a periodization is, and quite simply, is that you take blocks of history and you put them into periods, right? So the general one that you start with is you go, prehistory, ancient history, which is Mesopotamia and Egypt and those early civilizations. Then you do the classical period of Western history. And in the classical period of Western history involves 3 great powers. Now, normally I would ask you what they were, but I've got to get this all recorded for the students at home. But the 3 great powers of the classical period in Western European history are Persia, Greece, and Rome. Roughly, we're talking a period of history that extends from about, Rome starts earlier than this, but it starts around 500 BCE. In Athens, its century begins in 508, right? When it does that little revolution thing we talk about with democracy, right? So the whole thing about democracy happens with Cleisthenes and so on. And then they, of course, take on Persia. It's the autocracy facing off against the democracy. We have Marathon, we have Thermopylae, we have the Battle of Salamis. All of that fits into the classical Greek age. Greece itself has a periodization internally within just itself. Well, it's this. It starts out with the prehistory part. We won't talk about that. But then the history we're talking about is the Hellenic age. This is the age of Greece. This is the age of Athens and Sparta. This is the age of the great battles with Persia, right? This is also the age of the 3 great philosophers that we're talking about: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Okay, so now we have this periodization of Hellenic history. All right, now, about 100 years after that, a new phase of Greek history begins. Now, just repeat after me, right? In the Hellenic age, we had a philosopher named of Socrates, or Socrates to people who like that movie. Socrates begat which student? And Plato begat who? And Aristotle was the tutor of who? Very good, you guys remembered that. Alexander the Great. About 100 years after the Persian Wars, after the Peloponnesian Wars had destroyed Athens from its glory days, Alexander the Great of Macedonia, which was an ally of Sparta, by the way, during that conflict of the Peloponnesian Wars, he took his dad's army, which was, quite frankly, they would have just trampled the Spartans. I mean, it was a much more sophisticated fighting machine. It goes from a phalanx 3 deep to 16 deep. I mean, it's got cavalry, light cavalry, heavy cavalry. Alexander the Great led the light cavalry. It had all the elements that the Persians had, plus the advantages of the Greek style of fighting called the phalanx. And he took that army and invaded Persia. So instead of being on the defense, Greece goes on the attack. And it goes on the attack. It's the beginning of the Hellenistic age. Now, this word Hellas right here is Greece, right? This is Greece for Greeks. Hellas, the age of the classical age of Athens and Sparta. The Hellenistic age starts with Alexander the Great, who then takes over the entire Persian Empire. Plus, you need to add to this, he already controls all of Greece too. His father conquered it. He held on to it, and he takes the more or less united power of Greece on the road. He's outnumbered, but he's such a great strategist. He defeats the Persians in battle after battle and conquers all of Persia. Then he's not satisfied with that. He decides to leave Persia, goes through Afghanistan, yeah, he conquered that too, and then makes his way into Pakistan, present-day India subcontinent area, and he takes that. So he had a bigger empire than even Cyrus the Great and his descendants. bigger than Xerxes, bigger than Darius the first. It was the biggest empire up until that point in history. And then he takes his men finally back to his new capital city, which isn't in Greece. It's in the middle of Mesopotamia in a city called Baghdad. Now, hopefully you know where Mesopotamia is, the land between two rivers, and you know all that history, right? Baghdad had always been a glorious city. It had been a glorious city before the Persians came, when the Persians occupied it. Now Alexander's occupying it, and it was the place of learning and whatever. And when the Greeks come, they bring with them all of the learning and knowledge from the Greek city-states, the math, the science, the philosophy, the engineering, everything that they had, geometry, all of that came with them. And the Greek language comes too. The Greek language throughout this period in the Middle East and all the way through the Mediterranean becomes what we call the lingua franca. It's the language that most people speak because it became the language of business. Because people from the Greeks, were traveling everywhere, setting up colonies everywhere, and trading everywhere. And with the influence of Alexander and his generals that took over these areas and ran them for so many years, Greek philosophy and ideas spread throughout the Middle East and throughout the Mediterranean. Just in time for the Romans to show up. Okay, the Greek kingdoms lasted for quite a while. They were very powerful, very strong. But the Romans were stronger. And the Romans gradually would take all of Greece over and Egypt and a bunch of its other colonies too. But the Romans were interesting because they were so enamored with the Greeks in terms of what they knew and how smart they were and whatever, that they took the knowledge of the Greeks and made it their own. They would even take Greek teachers as slaves to teach their kids Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and all the things that Greeks had learned along the way, including things like Plato's Republic and things like all the writings and scientific knowledge of Aristotle. It was a pretty cool transmission of knowledge and ideas. It's the beginning of science. It's the beginning of so many things. And so the Hellenistic age then gives birth to the Roman period, and the Romans, of course, adopted it hook, line, and sinker. Now, again, we don't have time for discussion. I wish we did. But Rome eventually would split in half, right? Then we're going to talk about the Western half and the Eastern half separately. But also, Roman history is split in half. It has two parts to it. When Rome originally founded its city, basically two brothers got together and built a wall around an area which became a city-state called Rome. By the way, do you know the names of those two brothers? This part you know, right? Romulus and Remus. You remember that part? Yeah, the mythology that sounded. Anyway, point is, it's a great story, but that should have been in world history. But here's the deal: Rome gradually grew and grew and grew until it became this powerhouse. But who actually ran Rome for the first half of its history? Yes, the Senate. Where do you think we get the name the Senate from? The Senate was essentially land-owning aristocrats, wealthy landowners. That's who made up the Senate. It was the leaders of the families who owned the land in Rome. And they ran it almost at first like a city council. But the thing was, it wasn't a monarchy. They hated monarchy in Rome. They just did. We'll explain that. I'm going to have to add that to this lecture. So I'll explain it later. But this was an alternative to monarchy. Now, after about, 750 years of this type of rule, there was a coup. Does anybody know the name of the person who led the coup that took the Senate out of the picture and established a new form of government during a coup? Julius Caesar. But the coup ended tragically when Julius Caesar was what? Stabbed to death by the senators who just lost power. And then guess what? A civil war ensued. Now you know why we have to know the differences between these terms? This was not a revolution in terms of the way they did their government. This was a coup. I'm going to put myself above the Senate. Oh, that's not going to happen. Boom, civil war. Oh, guess what? The descendant of Caesar, what's his name, wins. His name was Augustus, who ruled forever, by the way. He ruled forever. And he ruled during the time period when somebody was born in Jerusalem that's going to have a pretty big impact on history. And who might that be? Jesus was born during the reign of Augustus Caesar. That's going to play an important role in the rest of the story going forward, because Christianity, starting with Constantine the Great, is going to give a lot of stability to what was left of Rome, because Rome was suffering, especially in the West, from attacks by which groups? Who was attacking relentlessly the Roman borders in the western part of the empire? Who? Huh? Oh, you were actually had one of the answers there. Thought I heard an answer. The descendants of the French were the Franks. So Frank was a Germanic tribe that invaded and then became the French. What other tribes invaded and just took over Roman land? The Vandals. What's the other one? The Goths, the Visigoths, which were kind of the same but split. And then you have the Angles and Saxons and Jutes in England, right? So they take over this whole region, and this is what we call the beginning of the medieval period. This is sometimes referred to erroneously as the Dark Ages, but the Western Empire collapses. Its economy would not fully recover for 500 years, as roads were not maintained, trade routes were shattered, even though they did trade still, but it wasn't nearly the volume that they had before. And guess what else died too? Literacy. Romans knew how to read. They were taught by their Greek teachers, at least the aristocrats, the noblemen, the people that need to know how to read, to run things. They were big about writing their laws down. They were big about keeping records. But here, no. Once it broke down, the Germanic people, there was no need to learn to read. If anybody could read in town, it would be the local Roman Catholic priest who would have a copy, handwritten, by the way, hand copied, of the Bible, maybe in the local church if you were lucky, and you would be read stories out of it as you came to Mass every day. And the entire Western European section of the Roman Empire converted to the Roman Catholic Church. The Germanic tribes, right, were converted to this religion over time. And it became the religion of the Western European Germanic tribes, who eventually would create countries and so on. All right, now, this medieval period, knowledge was lost. In fact, Greek writings were not taken seriously. They were even destroyed, even burned. Greek art, Roman art, was defaced, whatever, because it wasn't Christian. And this whole idea of the Germanics, who had it out for Rome anyway, the massive destruction of knowledge was huge. So they forgot Plato, they forgot Aristotle, they forgot Pythagoras. They were dumb as posts. Western Europe went from glory under Rome to, whoa, not so much. Now, that didn't happen in the Middle East. In the Middle East, in 622, which religious group got a jump start? Islam. So about 622 years after Christianity begins, these guys begin. And out of the Middle East, they come across the desert to Baghdad. And when they get to Baghdad, they say, hey, this is really cool stuff. What is it? Oh, it's all the Greek knowledge and everything that we've been learning since the Greeks showed up, Alexander and all that. And they go, oh, cool, teach it to us. Not only did they embrace it, they would translate it into Arabic and preserve it and keep it. All the knowledge of the Greeks was kept by the Arabs. The Arabs then created their own empire in the vacuum that was left by the collapse of Alexander's empire and the Roman Empire. And it was a glorious period of brilliance. They expanded on the knowledge too. They took, for example, in mathematics, they added a little thing that the Romans never had, the Greeks never had either, called the zero. Maybe they learned that from India, I don't know, but they certainly incorporated it and created the Arabic numerals. You guys ever use Arabic numerals? Oh yeah, and they invented another subject that you all love so much, algebra. And you know it's AL is a tell that shows you that it's Muslim in origin, that it's Arabic in origin, algebra. So they were now going through this glorious period. They had universities, they were doing brain surgery, they were doing all sorts of cool things during an empire of brilliance. Now, the Christians living in Western Europe, backwards as can be in terms of knowledge, decide one day that it's in their best interest to attack Islam. And what begins? The First Crusade, a brutal affair. And it was about 1100. The Crusades, there were 4 major Crusades. You guys know about those, right? No, maybe you don't. How many don't really know about the Crusades, really? Kind of be honest, kind of a little bit maybe here and there. The Crusades were an important moment in Western European history because they came into contact with a superiorly educated people. Why do Muslims all need to learn to read? The book. What's the name of the book? You've got to read the Quran. So they would take an invention from the Chinese and make paper. And they had copies of books that people read. In Western Europe, no, if you were lucky, you would have a Bible that was carved out, that was painted on skins, very rare, very hard to make. These guys were mass producing books. There was literacy in the Arab world. There was a complete lack of it outside of the church and a few noblemen in Western Europe. Now, sorry about this. Let's view this again. Let's present this. I hit the button with my hand there. Okay. Now, these two literate and illiterate societies would come together in the Crusades, and there was an unintended consequence, and it was this. The Western Europeans got a craving for the luxury items that the Muslims had. Linens, silks, spices, all sorts of goods made in India and China. They were trading with India and China. They were bringing those goods to the Muslim world. And then a group of enterprising Western Europeans called the Italians would start trading with the Muslims and created so much wealth that they didn't know what to do with it all. And they would take that wealth that they garnered from trade with the Muslims, selling stuff to the knights now and their families who were all hooked on all of these spices and all these luxury items, basically draining the gold out of Western Europe and sticking it right into the Muslim empire. But that's for another story for another day. But the Italians got so filthy rich, they had money to spend on a thing called the Renaissance, which literally means what? Now, you should have this from your humanities classes. The what? Rebirth. Perfect. The rebirth. The rebirth of what? Classical Greek and Roman knowledge. Their art, their architecture, their reading, their writing, and they rediscovered, thanks to the Muslim libraries that they conquered, they rediscovered Plato and Aristotle and all of the great thinkers and so on. So this period of Renaissance is really important. And it's going to be a springboard to an event which is so core and fundamental to the American Constitution that we can't go on without a knowledge of it. And it was called the Age of Enlightenment. So this idea of restoring knowledge, what do we do with that knowledge now? And oh, by the way, the Europeans would add cheap printing in the form of what? The printing press. So they took that Chinese invention, improved by the Muslims, of paper, and put it to good use, making cheap books, which meant literacy is going to do what? And because there's more money in the economy, there's lots more people who can read. And now they're reading books, which some governments thought were conspiratorial and heresy. But it gave us our ideas behind the American Revolution and the American form of government. And this periodization is really, really important, okay? So I'm going to drill down a little bit more on this than I normally do. Normally that's it, because I'm just reminding you of things you've studied in world history. But when I realized that nobody knows this history here, we can't get to here, the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, unless we understand what happens here. So we're going to do a bit of a review. So the whole activity guide is going to be put off for a couple of extra days while we drill these lectures down. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. Hopefully that goes home. You guys have any questions about that? And again, I just needed a good recording for people at home. Normally I break it up and ask questions and stuff. But how many of you really didn't know about it? How many don't know about the Age of Enlightenment yet? Okay, we got to get you ready for college, guys. We have to cover this stuff. Now, go to the website right now. I need you to do this at home. There is a site I put up for you guys to study. Let me escape out. Let's see. So let's all go there. Here we go. Escape. If you go to the website, I posted a study guide. It's called Flashcards from Study Stack. 33 questions about the U.S. Constitution. I need you to do those over the weekend. Well, do them tonight. It'll take you like 10 minutes or so. You should do it about 3 times. This is for your state test. I've got 10 questions already written. These are some basics about the Constitution. I guarantee you, none of you know all this, okay? Some of you maybe, one or two, but that's it. So this was given to me by a student who said, this is fun and helpful and it's easy. And it's going to be 33 questions that are core basic about the Constitution. I know it's rote memorization. I know it's very junior high, but that's the kinds of questions on the state test, okay? I think it helps though. I think you're going to go through this and you're going to say, I didn't know that. Like how many articles are in the Constitution? You guys know?
26.
27 what? Amendments. The articles are the original part, and how many articles are there?
1.
7, and you'll need to know what each one of them is for, right? Article 1 is about what? See, this is what I'm saying. This will help with that. Article 1 is the legislative branch. So what's Article 2? Executive branch. Article 3, judicial branch. We'll talk about the court today. Article 4, you know, powers of states, actually powers that were taken away from states. Okay. Supremacy clause, how you amend the Constitution, how you ratify it, how you actually approve it. Those are the 7 articles. You have to know all 7 of them cold, and you're also going to have to know eventually in another lecture all 27 amendments. Okay, and what they stand for. It's easy. You'll blast through it. You'll have it done by tonight. Guarantee it. 10 minutes tonight, 10 minutes tomorrow night, 10 minutes next night. Go through this, you'll have it. Okay. All right, you guys take care.
Okay.